Hello, in this video we are going to introduce the brain and get you familiar with the big picture of brain structure for your lab test number 4. And if you look on page 112 of your lab book, you're going to see the beginning of the list for test number 4. And it has a general list of some vocabulary words that you need to be familiar with. You probably learned these words in lecture class, but they have them again here in lab. So if you look, they have words like gray matter and white matter. You need to know the differences between those. Remember, gray matter are neurons that have no myelination. They are unmyelinated. They are processing centers, and they are kind of the decision-making part of the brain. The white matter contains myelinated axons that have that myelin sheath. And remember, they act as highways to move information really quickly back and forth from one place to another. Then it talks about the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Remember that the central nervous system is just the brain and spinal cord, and then everything else is the peripheral nervous system. So anything coming off the brain and coming off the spinal cord are part of the peripheral nervous system, whereas the brain and spinal cord itself are part of the central nervous system. Then it goes into the difference between a nucleus and a tract. It says a nucleus is a cluster of neurosoma neurons located in our central nervous system. And a tract are bundles of axons that move information from one place to another. So the nucleus is going to be clusters of neurons within the brain and spinal cord that can be processing centers. The tracts are myelinated white matter that move information from one place to another. Then we have a ganglion. A ganglion is just a cluster of neurons that's located in the peripheral nervous system. And again, this is an information center. You have a bundle of neurons called a ganglia. And we'll talk about this in lecture class when we get to chapter 14. But these ganglia kind of act as mini brains. They are processing centers located in our peripheral nervous system. Then, of course, we have the definition of a nerve, which is just a bundle of axons, bundle of neurons located in our peripheral nervous system. And then they have the last two words, gyrus and sulcus. When we look at the brain, the high areas, when you think of that brainy texture, the high areas of the brain, kind of those plateaus, are called a gyri or a gyrus, singular. And then the crevices are called sulci, or singular, it's called a sulcus. Now, if you go to page 113, and I'm just going to flip this over, on page 113 is really where the list begins. And we are going to go over this list in several videos, but I want to introduce you to the brain a little bit in this video, and then we'll go through some of those details in the next couple of videos. Now, first of all, what I want you to realize is that there are 4 major parts of the brain, and I'm going to write this down for you right here on a blank piece of paper. But I always like to give the big picture kind of first, and then we'll talk about the details. So there are 4 parts to the brain, and they are listed on page 113, and I'll show you where they are. But the 4 parts of the brain are the cerebrum. And the cerebrum is the thinking part of the brain. So your cerebrum is the part of your brain where you make all your decisions. All of the decision-making parts of your brain are that cerebrum. So if we look at a picture like this, and this is going to be a typical picture where we are going to be identifying parts and pieces of the brain. This is a picture of the brain cut directly in half, and you're looking at the inside half of the brain. Now, the cerebrum is our thinking part of the brain. So it is all of what we consider, typical brain structures. So the cerebrum is all of this area of our brain. It's the higher thinking area of our brain. So all of that area I just circled, and I'll kind of highlight it here. All of this with that typical brainy structure with the gyri and the sulci. See here, this high area is considered a gyrus, and then the crevice is a sulcus. All of that is the cerebrum. So the cerebrum is the higher thinking part of the brain. All right. Next is a part of the brain called the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is going to do autonomic stuff. It's going to do things like balance, posture, and fine motor skills. So things like swinging your arms are controlled by the cerebellum. Balance. Also fine motor skills. So if we go back to this picture, the cerebellum is this part of the brain that kind of looks like broccoli. So it's in the lower back of the brain. In other words, it's in the inferior posterior part of the brain. And it is an autonomic center. So things like balance, posture, and fine motor skills are going to be accomplished in that region of the brain. Okay, so that is the cerebellum. The next part of the brain, and this is actually not written directly on our list, but the parts are, and that is the brainstem. So the brainstem is made up of the pons, the medulla oblongata, and a part of the brain called the midbrain. These are on your list. The word brainstem is not on the list, but it is a major part of the brain. Now, what the brainstem is going to do is it is also going to do a lot of autonomic stuff. Can't spell, nomic. So it's doing a lot of autonomic stuff. If you remember, it has that cardiovascular center. It has a respiratory center in the medulla oblongata. So it is also doing a lot of autonomic stuff. Now, if we go to our picture here, the brainstem is all of this stalk that runs down to our spinal cord. So this area is the brainstem. The top of it is the midbrain. So this would be the midbrain. This hump is the pons. And then the lower hump is the medulla oblongata. Now, these areas are all doing autonomic stuff. So that's the third part of the brain. And then finally, we've got the fourth part of our brain, and that is going to be a part of our brain called the diencephalon. Diencephalon. Now, the diencephalon is going to be a part of our brain that I like to call it our primordial brain. It's our instincts. It's where we have the center of homeostasis. And it's also where we form our emotions. So this is the survival part of the brain. All right. Now, the survival part of the brain is the center here. So when you're looking at this centralized part of our brain, and I'm going to go to a different color here just to highlight this. So this center part of our brain, all in here, all of this is our diencephalon. Now, we are going to need to learn parts and pieces of all of these structures, but you need to know the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brainstem, which consists of our pons, medulla, and midbrain, and then our diencephalon. All right. So if you look at our list, these are kind of hidden within the list. So there's cerebrum. If you look, there's cerebrum a couple of times on the list. And then our cerebellum. And then if you look, see, we have the pons, midbrain, medulla oblongata. That is making up the brainstem. And then we have on the other side, oh, nope, it's right down below, sorry. Right down below we have the diencephalon. So you're going to have 4 parts of the brain. The first part, the second part, the third part, and our fourth part. All right. So that makes up the big picture of the brain. All right. And the big picture of the brain is going to help us learn these details. So the first thing I want you to do is make sure that you are learning those 4 parts. And now we're going to start to look at those 4 parts more specifically and name the rest of the list.